The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
You owe how much, Leigh?
Hi, Ashish. That sounds like something I would have to have a conversation with my husband about.
Yeah, that sounds like a conversation I had pretty much all through college.
Yeah,
I owe how much? For what?
right.
Yeah. So, well, I guess we're kind of talking about cash-strapped situations, except we're talking about third world countries. This topic actually came out of order, right? We had an editorial calendar for recording, and this was a topic that was supposed to come much later. However, a couple of headlines, none of them political, a couple of headlines showed up, some that were good and some that you kind of had to stop and say, nobody's asking the real question. Nobody's actually asking the real question. I preface all of it with an article I wrote on LinkedIn, or an article I referenced to on LinkedIn, and also a topic we've covered on this show last year, some episodes ago, on several occasions, where we talked about independent oversight on international loan facilities, in lending facilities, lending bodies, like the IMF, the World Bank, and whatnot. So there are definitely signs of progress, but there's some stuff that needs to be talked about. And unfortunately, we get so caught up in political rhetoric that nobody's asking the question that needs to be asked. This has nothing to do with politics. 1 + 1 still equals 2. It did long before you and I were here, and it will be long after you and I were here, are gone, right? When Caroline and Shiv are running the world, it'll still 1 + 1 will still equal 2. It's 1 equals 5 that we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of people in this world who find a way to make it equal 5. Right. So what we're talking about is the fair and impartial delivery of lending facilities to the poorest countries in the world. Now, these are facilities, whether the IMF, the World Bank, whatever the case may be, these are facilities that were set up when it was a Cold War, when it was the after effects of a conflict. Decades ago, right? The landscape is very different, right? When these facilities were set up, countries like India were still not a superpower. Countries like Indonesia were still not actually coming up as an economic might. Look forward now, it's no longer a 2-country race, right? India is going to be one of the top 3 economies in the world by the end of the decade. Indonesia is going to be a top 10 economy within the next 3 years, right? You are seeing a landscape that is changing drastically. The ability to trade cryptocurrencies on through ETFs and whatnot, through our exchanges, our stock markets, to be able to monetize different cryptocurrencies in a way that hasn't been done before, now starts legitimizing other currencies beyond the US dollar, the pound, whatnot. So, not to digress too much on that part, but the landscape is changing. Yet the lending facilities that the first world offers the third world are still not adapting fast enough. There's some good signs, but not adapting fast enough.
Can you define what you mean when you say lending facilities? What are we talking?
So we're talking about a country that is cash-strapped. Think of it like a country that's a college student, right? A starving college student. They need money. They're being offered these loans from different facilities, different entities. And they're being offered these facilities from not just lending facilities from a global organization, but from countries as well. Countries that want to play global lender as a means to beef up their revenue. A country that, for example, has a crumbling real estate portfolio that is having a huge drop in their own domestic production, and see global lending as a means to be able to generate interest income because of how much debt they hold. We all know what country we're talking about. So it's the ability to create a fair way. Now, I just got back from East Africa, and this was a big topic on the ground there with the people traveling with me, with the people on the ground. And there's a lack of trust. There's an erosion of trust. If you talk to somebody in Kenya, somebody in Tanzania, somebody in Egypt, there is an erosion of trust in global lending facilities, bordering on resentment. We sit here and say, well, they haven't paid back the loan. They need to do X, Y, and Z. And the people in that country are saying, we know we haven't paid back that loan. We told you we can't pay the loan. Why do you think we came to you in the first place?
Right.
So you have a couple of different things. Have you ever loaned your daughters money without any kind of plan to have them pay you back?
currently in that situation now with that. And I mean, I'm their mom. I don't care, but I guess I should be trying to teach them better habits. But yeah. I mean, yeah, I have loaned other people money before where I knew I was never going to get it back.
Right.
I
And
mean,
do you regret doing it? Not your daughters, but the other people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I regret doing it. I get upset that it still upsets me. Even I did it even though I knew I wasn't going to get the money back, but I'm still bitter about it.
Did it spoil the friendship? Did it spoil the friendship?
Yeah, I don't know that it spoiled the friendship, but it always is on my mind, and I just haven't brought it up because I know it's not going to change anything. So,
do you think it's on their mind too?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
So they wear a certain type of clothes or they drive a certain type of car. You kind of look and go, wait a second, how is it you're buying all that, but you're not able to pay me back?
Yeah.
That's basically what's happening on a country level. That's essentially what's happening. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to children, of course, that's a different scenario, right? It is. I mean, we want to teach our children fiduciary responsibility because they're inheriting this mess. But we can all be forgiven as parents because, yeah, it's a bit messy when you are loaning money to kids because at some point you're like, do I just gift it to them? Do I, what do I do? But when it comes to foreigners, what about somebody you've never met before? Somebody you just didn't know? Have you loaned them money? Somebody that you felt needed it and you decided to loan them money on a whim?
I've given people I don't know money, but I've never had any expectation of receiving it back, And
did you feel differently about that versus people who haven't paid you back?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I really felt like I was doing a kindness, with no expectation. And in those cases, I've always said, just pay it forward. When you can do better, please do better. Give what I've given you to someone else.
And that's because you knew their situation.
Right.
And you knew they had no means of paying you back.
Right.
And they were never going to have the means to pay you back.
Right.
So you just wanted them to pay it forward, help somebody else out because you knew going in both eyes open.
Yeah. But yeah, hoping that I was giving a seed that would be planted and turn into something bigger.
So not to oversimplify, but that's essentially what's missing, right? Lending organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, will loan countries money without fully understanding their ability to pay back. Or maybe they do, but they think, and there's three scenarios, right? One scenario is, well, we can dictate their behavior when it comes to how they run their country. We can dictate their behavior with healthcare, dictate their behavior with the economics and everything else and austerity measures. Another school of it is that just don't know. So there's a headline, I'll pluck a headline from the news from I believe it's a few weeks ago. Might have been, I think, when did I send that article to you about the World Bank decentralized?
Over the weekend. Yeah.
Last weekend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a week ago. It's a great first move. Amazing. It took 4 decades to get this, but I'm not surprised it took this long, right? This is the same organization during the pandemic that basically was up in September of 2020 saying, we're going to work on a solution for fragile economies. And we're going, too late. Damage is done. Mm-hmm. But this was a good first step, albeit very late, but still a good first step. They are decentralizing their managers and putting their managers in countries that they're lending money to. Now, it sounds simple. And yes, the World Bank has offices all over. So I'm not talking about just simply having an office. I'm talking about the people that are in charge of the lending instrument for that particular country or that particular region. They are actually closer to that country, closer to the problem, can understand economically, can understand from a societal level whether or not this country, A, has the means to pay back, B, will ever have the means to pay back, and C, what they really need the money for, right? And this is important because the rule of thumb with any lending organization, right, when they lend money and then they want their money back, what generally happens with third world countries is, well, we're going to have to tax. We're going to have to increase our taxes. In the case of some countries, it's a 30 or 40% increase over the course of 2 years without the subsequent increase in income because they can't afford it. But that doesn't solve the problem. A country like Kenya, for example, has roughly 50 million people. 5 million pay taxes. So how are you going to get the repayment when only a fraction of the economy is paying taxes, of the people are paying taxes? The rest live below the line to pay taxes or just don't pay taxes. So I thought this was a great first step of the World Bank saying, and I remember, what did I say to you? I'm like, hey, I think somebody's listening to our podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody's listening, right?
Yes. So when you talked at the beginning about when we started this, you were saying there has been some progress, but there still needs to be more. But are there other good things that are happening around this?
Yeah. Look, I think that this professor from the University of Pretoria, the one who I based this article on, who I thought was extremely accurate in his article, where he talked about independent oversight. He was talking about having an independent body. That conversation is now starting. Maybe they're listening to our podcast too.
Maybe they are listening to our podcast.
The conversation is starting on that level as well. But it's not because they see a merit to doing it. It's because they're threatened to the point where they have to. Right. So the other part of the news is that the U.S. is threatening to pull out of the IMF and the World Bank. And the flip side of it is, well, the U.S. pulls out, well, China will take over and start making all those loans with stricter measures or not strict measures, or, country building, whatever you want to call it, what nation building is the phrase, right? Whatever you want to call it. So the conversation about decentralization, the conversation about being able to actually have an independent body is now starting to take shape. It's early, but it's taking shape. It's a start. So there is good that's coming out of it. Unfortunately, we get so caught up in the political rhetoric, and we have to stop everybody and say, this has nothing to do with politics. Politicians don't understand the problem. It's not their fault. They just don't understand the problem. If you are the leader of a Western nation or a developed nation in the East or West, you don't necessarily understand the problem. Right? Egypt has a foreign currency crisis, has had for some time. They have had to sell off hotels, sell off national real estate, right? Country-owned real estate, sell off different things to be able to raise foreign capital, because they had a global currency crisis, their foreign currency crisis. Egyptians going overseas and coming to the U.S. only had a cap on how much they can use in U.S. dollars, because the country literally didn't have the money to pay back, to be able to control that exchange, right?
Really?
Interbank paying back and the conversions and everything else, the whole complicated process. They don't have the money to do it. Now, you go back and you can draw, by the way, you can draw a correlation to all of this. Every country that had a tourism-derived economy is the ones that were hit the hardest during the pandemic. They're the ones on this list. Most of them are those countries that are on this list, right? So in Egypt's case, they couldn't borrow money from anybody else. Who came in? India loaned them money. So now they've owned money. They've borrowed money from China, borrowed money from lending organizations. Now they've borrowed money from India as well. All you're doing is kicking the can down the road, because nobody was in the country to understand what was really the problem, right? And so, a body might say, well, we need a leader in charge that was going to understand this. Egypt doesn't work that way. It just doesn't, right? They tried that. It didn't work so well. Some countries aren't meant to have regime changes. Some countries are. So you have to look at it from a different standpoint. That's why I think having this decentralization, having an independent oversight, those are great first steps. The decentralization is actually more important, because actually understanding, it's the same thing, not to oversimplify, but those people that you loan money to, that you're hoping to get paid back from, it's like ghosting with them for a week to see how they live, and then getting a better understanding of how their day goes, where they live, what their lifestyle is, what they have to deal with, what challenges they face on a daily basis, and then understanding, I'm probably not going to see this money again.
Right.
And then realizing, hey, you know what? I'm okay with not seeing it again. So I'm going to give the money. And then all of a sudden, the resentment is lost there.
What do you think? This is just sort of a, ethical question, but do you think if a country ever does get to that point where they just give the money without any expectation of it getting it back, do you think they have a right to say how the money is spent?
That's an interesting question. It's already happening. Argentina's defaulted 9 times. It's already happened. Countries that default all the time. So it already happens. I don't know that they have a right. Well, that's a great question. Really great question. After the fact, no.
Right. But before, to say, I will give you this money and you can only use it for.
Yes, absolutely. This. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Banks do it all the time. Mm-hmm. You've taken a mortgage out. They tell you use the money for whatever you want to. Or do they say this money can only be used to buy this home?
Right.
You do a tax exchange from one house to the other. What does the government tell you? You can only use this money to buy another primary residence, right? There, the rules are there. Precedents are already there. So yeah, it should be there. But how do you ask that question if you don't understand how the country is there? You don't understand that everybody in Kenya is down to one meal and taxing them 40% does what? They have students protesting at the university there because they can't afford tuition. So now you're basically stifling higher education. So you have a future generation who has to deal with this, but you've now made the ability to educate them on the means to critically think about it and deal with it with independent thought. You're now starting to take that away, not because you planned on it, but because it's an unintended consequence.
Yeah, and taking away their ability to contribute to the economy and be innovative and
right,
all the things that might change.
Right. You know, I had this conversation just 2 days ago. I had this conversation with Shiv, and when we were talking about this, and I was talking to somebody else, and I said, the world is changing. The landscape of the world goes beyond where we were. And what we have to acknowledge, and this is so important, I think that we, not just as a country, but every country, I don't think as people, we do a good enough job acknowledging that the world has grown beyond us. Right? The ability to understand how the world works has grown beyond. So think about this for a second, right? Your daughters use smartphones, obviously, right? One of your daughters is using, well, both of them are using advanced tech. One of them is using advanced tech in the Air Force as well right now, right?
Yes.
When you were in the Coast Guard, you knew what the captain's bridge looked like. You knew what all the equipment looked like. If you were to walk onto a new expedition ship or a new Coast Guard cutter right now, would you be able to tell what it looks like up there?
You know what? I did that about a year ago and walked into the wheelhouse, and it was similar, but there were a few pieces of equipment there that I didn't understand, and I was truly amazed at the tie-in and how things are linked together and how automated things are. That there's less mental skill you have to use. You know,
The computer's doing more of it.
The computer's doing more of it. And I suppose that makes things safer for sure. But, you know, me, old school, I'm like, well, where's your paper chart and what happens if this goes down? You know how to get where you're going to go.
You did it a year ago. How many years was it at that point since you last walked onto a captain's bridge?
That has been about, well, and professionally.
In general, 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
if you went another 30 years and walked on that bridge, would you understand a whole lot less?
You know what? I don't know. In that case, I don't know. There are some foundations that are always there and things that are done the way they've always been done. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I suppose it's possible.
If it was a cutter and the hull looked different and they had more motors and more side rotors and everything else, and you're controlling everything through different means, you'd understand the basics of it. But would you feel confident taking control of the ship?
I doubt it. You know, I mean, there are ships out there right now that are completely, with the propulsion that is just blows your mind on. Yeah.
It's the same thing on a global scale. So similar to how you're handling the needs of the captain's bridge, the ship has changed. The currents have changed. The ability to control that ship has changed. The needs of the world have changed, right? Back in the 2000s, we were giving India money to teach them how to build nuclear plants, right? There was a double facility. Other ones, we were giving them money to basically to say, we'll help you, we'll collaborate. We're signing open trade agreements with them to be able to help build infrastructure or whatnot. That was 2000 to 2009, 2008, right? In that era, India just took a $1.2 billion loan from the World Bank to build wind turbines all over Gujarat, to be able to shift to a more sustainable way of living. They didn't ask any country for aid. They're the ones lending money now.
Yeah.
They're not borrowing.
That's an example of a country who took the money and did the right thing with it.
Well, their economy was growing. It was emerging. Everybody could see it emerging. They just had to get out of their own way. And sure enough, here they are. You know, they're a top 5 economy, about to be top 3. But they're not the only ones. Indonesia is the leading source of nickel in the world. Now, it's caused a bunch of issues internally within their own population of how labor issues and whatnot. but it is still the leading source of nickel. Nickel, lithium, these are resources that the future is going to need for batteries, whether it's for electric vehicles, for electric devices. This is where the future mining isn't coal, it's those. It's nickel, it's lithium, it's all of that. And they control the lion's share of nickel deposits on their sovereign land, and they're in the number 12 economically. This was a country that, again, go back to the early 2000s, we were lending them money to help them preserve their way of life. We were giving them aid against earthquakes and everything else and whatnot. And you see now, and again, they're not lending money out yet, but they will be soon, right? So the world has changed. Mm-hmm. It's no longer the U.S. and Russia, the U.S. and China, the U.S. and it's no longer that. All this talk about de-dollarization, right? The dollar is not going to be the sovereign, the global reserve, whatnot. Okay, whether it's a way off or soon, it is inevitable. It's not going to be the global reserve forever. At some point, that's going to change. And it's not going to be a country that takes over. It could be a different currency, a cryptocurrency, or a digital currency, you name it, whatever it is that takes over. We have to acknowledge that the world is growing beyond our ability. And I was having this conversation with a friend who's a teacher and telling him that, if you as a captain of a ship can acknowledge, I probably wouldn't feel comfortable taking this ship out. Yeah, I know the basic functions, but I probably would need a refresher on how this stuff works. You acknowledge it, right? You and I get into, if you're a pilot in an airplane and you trained your whole life on flying a Cessna or a DC-3, and I put you in the cockpit of a 777, or you trained on Boeing, and I put you in the cockpit of an Airbus that has the joystick. There's a learning curve. Yes, the basic functions of the plane, the ailerons, your pedals control the ailerons, the flaps, are the basic functions of the throttle flap. Okay, that may be right. Gravity is gravity. But there are certain things that now all of a sudden, the way ILS works, the way everything else works, there are certain things that don't work the same. So then why can't we as world leaders acknowledge the world has grown beyond our understanding? We need to get to the point where we need to decentralize and get closer to, as lending organizations, we have to get closer to what's really ailing these countries, because these countries that are third world today may not be third world 50 years from now. Proof of it is India, Indonesia, China.
Do you have a sense of who's sort of leading the charge on the global stage to step forward and say these things that you're saying? I mean, we're seeing this, that there is going to be this independent oversight leading the charge on that.
It's not any one country. It's not at that country level. It is the organization themselves that realize that we're not getting paid back.
Yeah.
And all these austerity measures we keep talking about putting in place, they don't work. Do you remember when the EU was having a currency crisis, when Greece and Italy were having, and you remember Germany was paying all their bills, right? Well, Germany's economy is now in real trouble. I don't see Greece and Italy running to their aid, right? And, for a variety of reasons. But that's the best example. If an antiquated monetary policy, which the EU, and this is going to probably have people disagree with me, but let's simplify it. It's akin to basically buying something with a bunch of your friends and not checking their credit.
Oh,
that's akin to it. We're starting a new club with the EU. Come on in, Greece. Come on in, Italy. Come on in, Ireland. Come on in, Spain. Come on in, Portugal. Great, fantastic. And then halfway through, wait, your credit sucks? Hold on. Wait, what do you mean you have no money? You owe how much? All of a sudden, it's not anybody's fault. But if it didn't work in a developed part of the world like Europe, how do we expect it to work in a Kenya and Egypt, or Tanzania, or South Africa? Right now in South Africa, today's headline, right? And this is the part that needs help. The World Bank is trying to dictate to South Africa that, okay, if you're going to borrow money from us, then you need to correct your economic growth. You have a rule that's been in place since the fall of apartheid that says that 30% of any business that's owned in South Africa has to be 30% of it has to be owned by an oppressed or underserved minority, whether it's African, whether it's Black, whether it's white, whatever the case, right? Indian, whatever the case, but you have to have 30% owned. Right? I'm not saying this right or wrong. But has anybody bothered to ask people in South Africa? And I'm not talking about government officials. I'm talking about, has anybody actually gone and actually stayed there and seen if this is really worth still having? Are there still issues in place and problems with race? The African National Congress is fractured. The party of Mandela is fractured. So that one voice that said we stand, that's okay, that's no longer functioning the right way. You have a country that took this last president and tried throwing him in jail for right or wrong. But that's where we are. And this is a country that is rich in resources from diamonds to everything else, including tourism, right? So the decentralizing, what the World Bank is talking about doing, is fantastic. It's a great idea. You have to understand, just again, to the people you loan money to, ghost them for a month. Go see how they live and realize, all right, I'm probably going to see this money again. As it stands, the World Bank, the IMF, all these countries don't get paid back a good amount of the time anyway. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you rather know going in and then say, look, I'm probably not going to see this money again, so I won't give you as much. I will give you this, but these are the conditions. This is why. Look, and here's a great example. Argentina is a great example, right? Every other time in the past, Argentina has defaulted on their debt, and IMF says, well, okay, it's par for the course. It's always happened. It's just the way Argentina is, and we'll just kick the can down the road. And this president, who has a PhD in economics, basically went to the IMF and said, okay, we won't default, but if you don't help us, we'll default somewhere else, right? We'll default with the U.S. banking system. So you should probably restructure our debt. What did the IMF do? It restructured the debt. It shouldn't have to be there, which, you think about it. So again, it's also understanding if somebody is in that country, you have to understand their intent. If a leader has been brought and that the fiscal policy is there, if you're in that country, understand the fiscal policy. What are the behavioral traits? Again, don't take what they've done for the last 20 years. What they're doing right now, right? What nobody is talking about is that before the current president came into power in Argentina, the previous president was allowing Chinese currency deposits into the country because they didn't have enough US dollars. People would travel in Argentina with stacks of US dollar bills because there was a shortage of foreign currency. Every bank had a shortage of US dollars. They were so desperate that were willing to allow you to bring Chinese yuan and trade on that currency. Not villainizing China, just simply saying that all of a sudden you're calling for desperate measures because nobody understood the mechanism. If you're going to loan money to a friend, you're going to loan money to a community, loan money to an entity. If you're going to loan money to a business that belongs to a friend, shouldn't you check the financials first? And shouldn't you check how they make money? Shouldn't you check how healthy the business is? Shouldn't you check what their ability to pay back is and what happens if they don't pay back? We do it on the private sector. Why can't we do it on this stage? Oh, maybe certain countries aren't supposed to get money.
Yeah, that's another whole topic of discussion. What happens if they don't get money? Maybe they dig their way out.
Maybe they dig their way out. Maybe countries are supposed to get money, but it's a grant. It's forgiven. And somebody's gonna listen and say, "Yeah, but that's unethical. That's not tenable." It already happens.
It does.
It's already happening.
And happening in other forms. Other types of aid and being propped up with, other private Doctors Without Borders or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Well, let's even go a step further. So the other headline. What's the other? I sent you about the 16%, right? The 16%. I sent you that headline too, right? That the U.S. controls 16%, roughly 16% of the IMF's lending facility. We're going to jump to politics, but that's not a political answer, right? So obviously the news right now is what if the U.S. drops out of the IMF? What if they drop out of the World Bank? That's not the problem. We're not asking the right question. How did we allow one country to control 16% of the lending facility? How did we allow one country to do it? In a Cold War world, in a superpower race, a two country superpower race, I could see it. Here, dodgeball, you're down to the finals. It's one versus the other, and I'm gonna pin everything on the guy that I think is gonna win. Here, take all the dodgeballs I have. Here, take everything. Here, you use it. We need you to win. Okay, I understand. We're not in that world anymore.
Right.
We're nowhere near that world. We're not in the world where Japan was a threat. Japan is a sinking economy. It's sinking like a rock. We're in a world where Germany's economy is sinking like a rock. We're in a world where Canada's economy is sinking like a rock. We're in a world where India's economy is ascending. Indonesia's economy is ascending. Vietnam's economy is ascending. Think about that for a second. It's not the same world, right? And we keep turning it political. It has nothing to do with it. The right question is not being asked. If the doctor from South Africa, if his theory, which I believe fully, had been followed from the get-go, and I'm talking about not from when it was with the inception, but even 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, to say, there should be an independent body, a rotating independent body made up of first world and third world countries, right? So think about this, right? I want you to think about this for a second. Let's say the people you loan money to that haven't paid you back. Let's say you were part of an HOA, homeowners association, and if they were on the same board with you. How awkward would that be to get into a meeting room with them, same HOA board, and they're going to pontificate about fiscal responsibility, about the association and whatnot. You're looking at going, really interesting. You should say that. Wouldn't they feel more pressure to pay you back?
You would think. You'd hope.
You're locked in a room with them.
You would hope they would be.
They're that's not just you and them, but they're in a room of you, them, and 6 or 7 more of your peers that are part of the same community. They all know that they have borrowed money and haven't paid it back. Could they even come in and look at everybody at that point? Or would they just say, I don't want to deal with this, here, take the money?
Yeah, those are good questions. I don't know. Depends on how big what are.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, you'd have to have a serious pair to be able to walk in and not feel anything.
I think you would.
But that's essentially it.
Yeah,
that's essentially what we're talking about. That you're looking from the standpoint that you're from the same standpoint. If there's an independent body, a rotating independent body made up, and the countries that borrow the money, they're on that board, right? If you are, imagine a board that has the U.S., has Great Britain, has Germany, has Canada, whoever, right? Has the G7. And then on that board, rotating G7, rotating out there, and then you also have Kenya, Egypt, Tanzania, South Africa, Argentina. And you get into a room and everybody tells Kenya or Egypt or Colombia, you need to pay back your money. And in that same room, closed environment, on that board says, how come Argentina didn't have to do it? Yeah, it's an awkward conversation, but it needs to happen, right? And I know I'm simplifying it. But an independent rotating body every 2 to 3 years that keeps rotating out. Two things happen. One, the countries that are borrowing money, they're being allowed to grow. To your point earlier, that there are specific terms given as to how money should be used and how it's paid back. Locked in terms. And you're not giving what they can't afford, right? And that part is it. If they go to a third party, another country, to get more money as well, they have to then come and answer to you. That could be a term of it. That could be one. If you're going to go to a third party to borrow money, you cannot borrow money here. It's a non-compete, right? I mean, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's a start.
It is.
It's a conversation that needs to occur, right? And if you have that independent body that then also talks about how the IMF is funded and talks about equal contributions to the IMF according to GDP, you wouldn't have one country controlling 16%. Or maybe you do at one point, but rotates out as other countries come in. I mean, think about it, right? India is lending money independently of the IMF to other countries, yet they are the 4th largest economy in the world. They could use the IMF as a vehicle. I mean, they do to a certain degree, but not all the way. So means,
clearly they don't see an upside to being with the IMF.
Right. So the entire mechanism has to be checked. And we have to admit that maybe the way this mechanism works has gone beyond our understanding. Maybe it requires somebody who understands cryptocurrencies to come in and say, all right, we will loan you this money in US dollars or in whatever currency. We'll hedge it against our position in Bitcoin, because now you can trade it, right? We'll hedge it against our position in Bitcoin. Or again, and I'm floating something out there. I know this is out in left field, okay? But there are people in the world who understand this. There are kids in high school that have ladders built around different currencies that are building retirement portfolios for themselves at 17.
Yeah, I know some of them too.
Yeah, they're based on cryptocurrencies. They understand how the mechanism works. You or I don't understand that. We couldn't.
No, but I trust them, so I did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I trust them fully, but I do. I mean, 1 + 1 has to equal 2. But
yeah,
there has to be a new blood that comes in to start coming with new ideas. But there has to be conditions. You have to start treating it like the private sector. But you have to start having independent oversight that holds them accountable for what they're going to do. And that's the key. So it's a good first step.
It is. And hopefully they're going to listen to your podcast and they'll...
they're going to listen. They're going to listen to your questions. They go, yeah, how come we're not asking that? I mean, think about this. Okay, you have said from the beginning that you're not a financial person.
No.
You've said that from the beginning. But yet you followed along with everything we're saying.
Well, you broke it down for me. I needed you to simplify it. But I think a lot of people do. And I think that's the only way we make this conversation accessible to everyday people, is to understand it in its simplest terms.
Absolutely
Which
right.
I appreciate you doing for me. Because,
Oh, for sure. You know what? I have a rule, and my kids know this rule. And whenever I help my daughter with her math homework, I'll tell her, explain it to me. She goes, you know what I mean. I go, no, I don't. And my rule is that if you understand the equation, it means you should be able to explain it to me without any problem.
That's right.
You know, it's that scene from Moneyball, right? Where Brad Pitt's character is sitting in the room talking about, what's the problem? Well, we need this. No, what's the problem? No, we need it. No, what's the problem? We need this. No, we don't. You're not looking at the problem.
Right.
So it's simplifying it is as much of a help to me as it is to you, right? Because if I'm simplifying it for you, it's allowing me to explain it. As I'm explaining it, it's allowing me to actually connect the dots and go, yeah, this is lucid. This makes sense. I feel confident saying this, and yes, this is a good summary of what the mechanism is. The problem is ego. In those rooms, you have people that don't understand this works, but they're not willing to admit they don't understand because they'll be shamed out of there. If you get a rotating independent body involved, I guarantee you there's people in that room that don't understand it. You'll be forced to simplify it. You know, I mean, that's
brilliant. I like that.
So the solution to the world's problems when it comes to fiscal policy, listen to this podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ashish is going to lead us all into a no-nonsense approach to.
Oh, yeah. Just me. The reincarnation of Ross Perot. That's exactly what we need.
Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what we need. Yeah, me venturing into politics. Good luck with that.
Well, there's other ways to be involved.
There's other ways
in politics.
No, exactly. It's understanding the first rule. Politics has nothing to do with it. Right? And you know what? I'll leave with this thought. I'll leave you with this thought. Central banks in pretty much every country, including ours, are detached from politics. The president of the United States, whoever he or she is, cannot dictate to the head of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, whether or not rates can be raised or lowered. They can lobby, but you have an independent board of governors, a Federal Reserve board of governors that dictate this. They have an open market committee meeting that they will talk about this from a pragmatic point of view and decide. And you see where there's dissension in terms of how they do things. Why can't that happen on global lending platforms? We already do it on the central banks, whether it's the EU, whether it is us, whether it's Canada, whether it's the UK. We already do it. They already separate church and state. They already separate politics and finance. Why can't we separate it here? Needs to.
Oh, they have their marching orders.
All right. Listen to this podcast. That's where we start.
That's right. That's right.
Well, this was awesome. This was absolutely. I'm glad we moved this topic up to address these things. Yeah, it was good. So, all right. Well, till next time, obviously.
Until next time, go out and do good in the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everybody. And remember, 2 + 2 always equals 4. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.